After our talk on Tuesday, I was talking about the kind of the spectrum of what happens in our sadhana from the, if you will, the arduous effort to open our heart to, etc. I guess opening our heart, etc. is not really something we should combine together. And on the other end of the effort to free ourselves from ourselves, the effort to free ourselves from all of our karma, all of the debris that we've collected over lifetimes, as one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum, the illuminating insight that we're free. And in fact, we've always been free. That even though our experience of binding, the experience of bondage, the experience of suffering is a real experience, it is really only the experience of a limited consciousness. And specifically, you can understand that it is the experience of ego. It is the experience of the consciousness in us that misunderstands and believes that it is the doer, and believes that it's different than God and therefore separate from God. That is a ongoing dynamic, lifetime after lifetime, until there is some intervention. So Amrita Devi asked a question that I'll respond to. Don't put the slide up yet. And this is her question. She said, tonight you said that the degree to which one might have to make an effort, or the length of time of that effort, is dependent on how much debris has to be dissolved. But in other talks you've said that the level of effort which upaya is dominant depends on the degree of Shaktipada one receives, which is completely up to God. Can both be true at once? She says, the first version is generally experienced as true, but can God overwrite anything? And so, the first thing I'll say is, you can look at your slide. And this is a picture of a person walking into the ocean. And the caption of this says, grace is the override. It goes on to say, simply by the bestowing of God's grace, the endless drifting on the ocean of samsara is ended. Samsara is the term for transmigration, for lifetime after lifetime of not having the experience of freedom, of not having the experience of oneness, of not merging with that divine source. And because that's not our experience as the result of our sadhana, then the endless tension, the endless creation of karma, the endless drama, the endless need perpetuates itself. This is what the term samsara means. And so that transmigration is overridden by God. There is not generally, even if we're really good doobies, enough merit to change the trajectory of our lives. Which doesn't mean we shouldn't be good doobies. Good yogis and yoginis. That's so foundational that it's absurd to even think about that. Well, we shouldn't have to be good doobies. We shouldn't. So, particularly the Buddhists talk about merit, the creation of merit. I do 4 good things, it eliminates 2 bad things. Okay, let's play that game, because let's create good merit instead of bad karma, right? So it's not it's an important concept, but understand this: you can be the biggest asshole on the face of the planet, or the most simple, giving person, and grace doesn't give a shit. God doesn't care, on one sense. And when we talk about grace, the descent of grace, Shaktipada, we are talking about God deciding to wake himself up as you. And there's no circumstance up to that point that really determines that. Although there is some contribution to that, we'll say. Because think about it, okay, God's up there in the clouds, and he's got his trident in his hand, and a big long beard. Oh wait, that's Jesus. That's Moses, right? Yeah, they all look the same. And he's looking down, and he's watching you be, a criminal, hurting people all the time, greedy, manipulating people. He might say, maybe not. Maybe I'll just let him continue to suffer, even though he is causing suffering. Over here, he looks at, again, a simple monk, a simple mother that loves her children, a caring person, and says, okay, I'll lift you up. God is God because God can do the impossible and does the impossible, and doesn't understand that the importance of grace, the mystery and the magic and the gift of grace, is that it is not determined by your actions, but what is determined is your response, is what happens as you respond to grace. I've told you a number of times, particularly with all those Tibetan yogis, they were pretty bad dudes. So many of them were criminals. Padmasambhava was a murderer, and yet is the greatest saint ever walked the earth in terms of Tibetan Buddhism. And there are many, many other stories. So you could think, well, why should he deserve it more than the little monk that was just grinding flour for his master? There's no answer to that. So our sadhana is the response to grace, and it is the only response to grace is gratitude. And the expression of service and devotion that is the expression of that gratitude. What's extraordinary to watch is that even those of us who have received that miraculous call somehow puts down the receiver. No, I really prefer to be a jerk. I prefer to suffer. I prefer to live in the prison of my own need, to be a bird encaged in an infinite awareness. I said at the end of that talk, which Nichani grabbed the ending line and asked me to also speak to it. I said that the same consciousness that allows you to know your state is the same consciousness that allows you to change your state. Now, the state of stupidity, the state of confusion that we normally walk through life in, perpetuates itself unless there's an override, unless there is an intervention. And that intervention is God. Now, to respond to Amrita's question, we understand, and we've all can look at our experience and other people's experience, that there is, if you will, degrees of grace, degrees of intensity. It's described as 9 divided by times 3, it's 27. Well, if you multiply that times 4, it's 108, right? The point being is that the highest grace is when God just wakes us up. Says, I am you, and you are me, and we are all together. I am the walrus. That's the highest grace. And in that moment, or from that moment on, there is no effort. There's no debris to uncover. That's the highest grace is the end of the spectrum of Shambhavopaya, which is the path of awareness, and that light becoming so bright that it becomes Anupaya. Path, no path, illuminating insight. Only God can decree that for us plebeians. If you look at the experience, most likely of yourself, as a teacher looking at the experience of students, it reinforces what these ancient masters recognized and kind of defined or understood explicitly over centuries of watching people in their response to grace. That the statistical analysis indicates that the 95% of the people who receive grace receive what's, and I apologize, I forget the Sanskrit term, but it's the third level down. Now remember, there's 9 levels. Believe me, even level number 9 is good. That's the fundamental response or experience that happens when grace descends, is that this longing takes place in us. Out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. When we're heading towards the same, bizarre, dastardly, unconscious, self-serving roto track that we keep going around, out of nowhere, somehow this longing to know God shows up. That's grace. That's the foundation. It is grace. And so any one of those 9 levels is represent the degree of that longing, of that God waking himself up in us to himself. This third level down, if we'll call it that, is when that longing becomes prominent in us, that it changes the trajectory of our life. When we're speeding down the highway of egomania, all of a sudden we see the exit that says, there's a better route. And we take it. And when we get off that highway, well, the first thing we encounter is a little hut on the side of the road with a little Swami sitting there selling pranams. Selling the energy and the support. We shouldn't say selling, giving it away. Here, I have this for you. That longing calls forth to it the energy that it needs to free itself And that energy shows up in the form of a teacher. Okay. The amount of debris that we use that term, and Amrita asked the question, that's needed, the archaeological excavation that's needed, is not that's not the amount of grace that we receive, or the intensive grace, doesn't change that. It only can override it, in the sense that that highest grace just, it doesn't even dissolve the debris. The debris is vanished. It's a magic trick. But for most of us, the longing happens. We come in contact with a practice, with a tradition, with a teacher. We come in contact with the love and the nourishment and the guidance that we need to begin to burn through the debris that we have created through our lifetimes of transmigration, that we have created through all of our tensions. And so, as we look at the image, as we cross the ocean of samsara, perhaps we're given a little log. That's all we got, and we have to paddle ourselves across the ocean. Sometimes we get a nice kayak, and we get a paddle even, right? So we can move faster. We can bob and weave around the rocks and the sharks that are trying to get us. Maybe we get one of those cigarette, what do they call those things the guys use to run drugs? They're called cigarette boats. You know, they're really long, right? What? Chris Craft, yeah. We could move across fast, right? Maybe we get a hovercraft. You know, we're not even bouncing on the waves. We're moving above. Maybe we get an airplane. That, in a sense, is determined by the degree of grace. Is the amount of energy, the amount of direct insight that we receive as God calls us home. So it doesn't make a difference whether you are swimming, you're swimming or you have the hovercraft, whatever. It is your karma, it is your sadhana that you have to deal with, and you can't sit there and bitch and say, well, God, look, Sadashiva, he has it easy. He has a hovercraft, right? And all I got is this, I got actually an anchor hanging around me, right? Because it's your life, and on one hand, it is determined by the debris, the intensity of the debris, the number of lifetimes that you've collected your cute little black rocks, right? And therefore the amount of energy that you need in order to free yourself. So it can't be one or the other. It is both. And even when you think about this degree of Shaktipada, which correlates specifically or directly to this continuum of our spiritual life, the upayas, those are nonlinear in the sense that, and I've said this many times, sometimes it's talked about Shambhavapaya as the highest. Perhaps Anavapaya is the highest. Why would I say that perhaps Anavapaya is the highest?
Because it's still a means to liberation.
Yes, because they all are. But Anavapaya requires that we take responsibility for the gift that we've received. And perhaps the easier that gift comes to us, the easier we lay it back down. And so the point being is the anavopaya, the energy, the effort to free ourselves from our own self-created birdcage and all the debris, is the demonstration to God that we care. The demonstration to God that we take responsibility for our own freedom, even though he, she has presented it to us. I've said to you many times, when you come in contact with particularly with not specifically, but we'll just leave it. When you come in contact with a guru, when you come in contact with that energy that you called forth from within yourself, and you receive initiation, and understand that in the ancient days, you never got near a guru. You never got in to sit and practice with him without being initiated. That initiation is a twofold dynamic. One of recognizing what you're receiving, and two, taking responsibility for what you have received. You must take responsibility for the gift of freedom that God has given you. And okay, so if you were just spontaneously combusted, you're just pure light, then okay, maybe you don't have to take much responsibility, right? Because God took that responsibility. But if that wasn't your experience, and you wouldn't be sitting here listening to me if it was, right? Then that taking of responsibility is critical. You can think of the upayas like this. The deeper our misunderstanding of our true self, the more work we have to do. The deeper recognition of our true self, the more work God is doing. I want to just take our hovercraft up as high off the ocean as we can get it. I want you to understand the perspective that I'm trying to impart to you. It is about freedom. It's not about freeing yourself from your shit and this thing and that thing and this thing. While all of that must take place, do not lose sight that it's about being freed from the ocean of samsara, from the endless transmigration. And we can say from one lifetime to the next, but let's get real. From one moment to the next. That we keep perpetuating and having the same experience of tension and ego and drama. From this moment to that moment to this moment to that moment to this moment. And it's endless. Something has to stop that. And because you have the consciousness to know your state, you have the consciousness to change your state. This is the responsibility that we all have to God, and you can say that we have to our gurus if we've been initiated by our guru. And it's extraordinary how almost always people lay down that responsibility. At some point, oh, it got too hard, oh, he asked too much of me, oh, he wanted me to change too much, oh this, oh that, woe is me. There are a million reasons to lay it down and one reason to hold on to it. And if you stop paddling as you're trying to cross the ocean, you will sink. God, grace is the one who does the overriding.